Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, January 3rd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's election strategy for the 2024 presidential election. In around 11 months, we will have results from a bunch of states that were voting and have voted in the 2024 presidential election that will tell us whether or not this strategy we are going to be talking about today has had any impact or benefit for the Trump campaign in the general election. And this strategy, I'm sure, as you can tell from the title of this video, is that Donald Trump wants to compete in traditional Democratic strongholds, states that have been very solid for the Democratic Party for quite some time now, where Donald Trump genuinely believes he has a viable shot at victory. Now, in this interview, he spoke to Breitbart and talked about his plans and what he saw for the future of his party and the future of his political campaign. And for a while now, Donald Trump has been widely expecting to win the 2024 presidential election, saying that there's no doubt that he wins the important battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and that he's going to expand off his 2016 electoral victory and what he saw as a 2020 electoral victory, obviously referencing that he does not accept the results of our most recent presidential election. But Donald Trump has been very adamant that he is going to win. His campaign team has been very consistent on Fox News that the only Republican who can take on and defeat Joe Biden is the former president. And so with a lot of that rhetoric and with a lot of that being surrounded by all of this conversation and polling and fundraising and the data that shows that Joe Biden is on track to lose the upcoming election, Donald Trump is expected to make a play, and even admitting to doing so, that he's going to go further into these traditional Democratic states. And I don't have to be the first one to tell you that this is a strategy that probably isn't going to work. Donald Trump might be on track to win the presidency, but he certainly is not on track to win the states that he mentioned in this interview. He mentioned New York, a state that Democrats have been winning in every election quite some time now, since 1984, making a play for Minnesota, a state that has voted with the Democratic Party since 1972, making a play for New Jersey, and making a play for Virginia. And saying here, I'm going to make a heavy play for all four of those states, and saying, you know what? I might not be the smartest in doing this. I may be foolish in making this decision, but I'm going to do rallies, I'm going to do speeches, and I'm going to work on them. And that doesn't mean I'm going to work as hard as Pennsylvania. This is the one caveat that I think Republicans took a sigh of relief when he followed up in this statement by saying he's not going to put as much effort as he will in Pennsylvania to win these states, but he's certainly going to do a lot of time in these states that would otherwise be very traditionally Democratic. And so what I think this is, number one, especially when he ends that statement about Pennsylvania, where I'm doing very well, is that right now we're in a position where Donald Trump has a level of overconfidence backed by the fact that he is doing well in the polls. I think for somebody who their expectations were significantly less than what his actual performances were back in 2016, for instance, and 2020, is that the polls underestimate him. And so for the first time ever, with this lead, the first lead that he has had since he announced his presidential campaign in June of 2015, Donald Trump now has this sense of belief that he's on track to easily win the presidency, and that it's up to him to change up the map and win over some states that he otherwise might not have been able to win. And so I see this as a huge display of overconfidence, a huge display of I'm going to win this no matter what, and something that could actually serve to the detriment of his campaign depending on how he is spending resources. Because like I said, I don't have to be the one to tell you that this campaign strategy is not going to go well. Newsweek even covered this in saying that his election strategy has no chance in 2024 because this is not the way that you want to go. Like I said, in the last election, Joe Biden did quite well in these states: Virginia, Minnesota, New Jersey, and New York. Starting off with the state that Joe Biden won by the least in 2020 was Minnesota, where he won by 7.1%. Then over in the state of Virginia is the next state. Biden won here by 10.1%. Then we head over to the state of New Jersey, where Biden won by 15 points. And then, of course, to the state of New York, where Joe Biden won over roughly 61% of the vote, and an over 20-point margin across this state, defeating Donald Trump in his own former, at least, home state in 2016 when he switched registration to 2020. Regardless, though, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, double-digit states for President Biden, Minnesota, still around 7 points. But still, the one state that in 1984 refused to vote for Ronald Reagan in the only state out of the entire country that voted blue in that election and has maintained its Democratic identity, since the 1972 election, which was the last time that it voted red. And so Minnesota, New Jersey, Virginia, New York are certainly states that in the Democratic Party's eyes are not ones that they are going to be heavily spending a lot of money in or contesting because, quite frankly, they are on track to win all of them. Even if Joe Biden is to lose the election today, which I just made a prediction a few days ago about a Trump and Haley matchup, 2 weeks ago about a Trump-Biden rematch, you find out that I still have these states as Democratic states because New Jersey and New York are not going to narrow down below 15 points, and Virginia and Minnesota, again, have enough of a firewall here to realistically say that Joe Biden is on the pathway to victory here. And I think part of this might be that because there is so much expectation around Trump winning the election, that the people around him also are constantly reaffirming that, not even referencing that they could potentially lose in 2024. I mean, there is a very realistic shot that Biden turns around these numbers between now and November and ends up leading into Election Day and ends up winning re-election. And I think that's something that the Republican Party can't even fathom or begins to think about. Maybe a year ago they did, but now they genuinely believe that Donald Trump is on a pathway to victory. And it isn't just them. For the first time since maybe the 2012 election, the plurality of Americans believe that the Republican nominee for president, or soon-to-be nominee for president, is on the pathway to victory. YouGov and The Economist just released a brand new poll that shows Donald Trump tied with Joe Biden nationwide, Republicans leading the generic ballot by 2 points, and Joe Biden doing a little bit better against DeSantis and Haley. But amongst the same electorate that's tying the presidential race, they asked these voters, regardless of who you prefer, who do you think would win the presidential election if Joe Biden was the Democratic nominee and Donald Trump the Republican nominee? And Donald Trump wins this by 13 points. 48% of Americans believe that Donald Trump would win the election, in contrast with just 35% saying Biden. And so this, again, is not their preference on who they want to vote for, but rather who they think the country will vote for. And this is something that I think actually serves to the detriment of Donald Trump. Because looking at these crosstabs here, Democrats still believe that Biden is on a pathway for victory here. You have that 78% of Democrats are saying Biden's going to win. Around 10% Democrats say Trump's going to win. Well, that'll probably inspire that 10% to vote. But on the independents, you find that 20% of independents believe Biden's going to win. 49%, a 29-point difference, say Donald Trump is on the pathway to victory. Just 6% of Republicans say Biden is on a pathway to victory. 87% of Republicans believe he's going to win. And so in a complete and total flip from the 2016 election and the 2020 presidential election, we now have the national populace saying it's not going to be Clinton who wins. It's not going to be Biden who wins. In this election, it's going to be Trump. And so I think this is exactly what is fueling this type of election strategy that, quite frankly, is just going to be a waste of resources, a waste of time for a president who arguably still has a competitive election ahead of him. Because even if he is winning nationally, the metrics here don't exactly add up in statewide polls to a very, very strong victory for Donald Trump. I think what he is being told is that he has consistently outperformed what the polls have said in the past, has done a very good job on the Republican side at doing well in these elections. And so he's seeing that he's up by 2. There's no reality that he loses if he's up. Biden was up by 7 on election day and won by 5. So if Biden is losing by 2, he's going to lose by 4. Simple math, right? But the 2022 midterms put a halt in that. The 2022 midterms was the election in which we realized that maybe the polls weren't super correct. For instance, in the state of Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz was up on election day when it came down to the polls. In Georgia, Herschel Walker was up on election day when it came down to the polls. Raphael Warnock almost won outright, and then fast forward to the runoff election, Warnock wins by 3. Blake Masters was up in the polls on election day, supposed to defeat Mark Kelly by a margin of 0.33%. Mark Kelly wins by 5. Adam Laxalt was on track for victory in the polls on election day. Catherine Cortez Masto ends up winning. It wasn't just isolated to the Senate elections. You look at Arizona. Katie Hobbs was supposed to lose to Kari Lake by 4 to 5 points. She defeats her Republican opponent. In Kansas, Laura Kelly was supposed to lose to Derek Schmidt. She wins by 2 points in a state Donald Trump won by 16. In Wisconsin, Tony Evers was supposed to lose to Tim Michels. Didn't happen. In Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer was supposed to win by 1 or 2 points. She won by 11. In Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro was supposed to win by 4 to 5 points. He won by 15. And so all around the country, a lot of the polls were severely underestimating the amount of Democratic support in statewide elections and individually competitive races. But on the national average, you found that the numbers actually were quite true. Because in the 2022 election results, the numbers said Democrats were going to lose the popular vote by a margin of roughly 3 points. Guess what the margin ended up being? 2.8% in favor of the GOP. So national numbers, similar to the ones we see now, were telling us that the Republican Party would win that popular vote by 2.8%, by 3 points, by roughly the margin that they did. But it didn't account for the fact that they didn't translate to Republican victories in a number of competitive races. Democrats still pulled out ahead in states that Joe Biden was barely able to win in a national map where he was winning nationally by just 4.5%. Georgia went to Biden by 0.2, Arizona by 0.2. The national margin was 4.5. An 8-point swing gave Democrats a 5-point victory in Arizona and a 3-point victory in Georgia. How does that make sense? It makes sense because these statewide elections, even if the polls indicated Republicans were going to do well, you actually saw an underperformance. And something that I think could worry the Republican Party, but they simply aren't worried. And I think they aren't worried because the numbers right now and the expectation from the members of the party is that actually Trump is going to win. For again, the first time since 2016, they now have a hopeful GOP candidate who they think could win the general election. This whole idea of electability around Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis has collapsed because they were arguing that Trump can't win because he's the only one who has lost on the GOP primary ballot. And so all of those candidates are saying Donald Trump can't win, Donald Trump can't win. Clearly, Republicans think he can. 87% of them think he can, quite frankly. And the majority, seemingly the majority, soon to be majority of independent voters, believe that he also is on a pathway to victory. And just 35% of Americans say that Joe Biden is going to win. And so I look at that and I'm wondering, okay, wow. This is what explains the overconfidence and this idea that somehow he's going to win New York. He's going to win Minnesota. He's going to win Virginia. He's going to win New Jersey. That these states that haven't voted red since the 70s for some, since the 80s for others, decade upon decade upon decade, and an upcoming decade, where in 22 they voted blue, for Democrats to win again, and Republicans and Donald Trump's campaign is saying, we can make a play for it. I won't fight here as much as I will fight for in Pennsylvania, but best believe I'm going to rent out Madison Square Garden and host a major rally here. Are you? Are you really? And if you do, think about the tens of thousands, potentially millions of dollars that will be spent and allocated to states that were unwinnable from the beginning. What I think we will see in hindsight, if the Trump campaign follows through on this, is that it will, in fact, hinder their ability to win the general election. And I think it speaks to a higher level of overconfidence that will continue to hinder them between now and November. Because I think this will scare the Democratic Party into unifying behind Biden. It is a very different thing to be working as a Democrat when voters can turn out for you and will turn out for you if they think you are going to lose. When the entire realities of 2016 and 2020 were that everyone was saying that Democrats were going to win. There was no chance in hell that Trump wins. When he won in 2016, okay, that was a fluke. We crushed him in the midterms, and Democratic operatives saying all across the country, we're about to usher in a Biden victory, a Biden tsunami. Well, it wasn't exactly that. It was still a victory. They ushered in a trifecta, but it came with a very difficult cost. There was so much time and effort spent into a number of states and districts and competitive races that they honestly thought they were going to win by 7 to 8 points, that they ended up winning by 1 to 2 or less than that. And so you look at that and say, the 2020 election, there was a huge expectation that Biden was going to win. The 2016 election, a huge expectation that Clinton was going to win. But in 2024, it is different. And I think because the people that Donald Trump surrounds himself are just like this Republican electorate that genuinely believe that Donald Trump is on the pathway to victory, which I think right now he is. But I also think that this was not the case in 2016. or 2020 when there were situations where Trump could have won the election by larger than he did in 16 back then. Or in 2020 where Trump could have won the election. For example, before COVID, when Trump was polling a lot higher, his approval was a lot higher, the economy was in a much better state, we weren't dealing with a pandemic. And so back then, those metrics should have suggested and did suggest in hindsight that Trump would have won the election. But these questions, when they were asked, Biden was easily the victor, right? Even if it wasn't Biden, if it was Sanders, if it was Warren, if it was just Democratic nominee, who do you think will win the regular election? A lot of Republicans were saying the Democrats. A lot of the Democrats were saying the Democrats. A lot of the independents were saying the Democrats. It is not that case this time around. So I think we are starting to see Donald Trump's campaign strategy genuinely slip. And I don't say this lightly. I say this to point out that Donald Trump clearly is making a misstep by making this choice to campaign in states that he has no chance at winning in. But I think it is a testament to a higher problem that deals with the higher workings of the campaign when you have all of his surrogates on Fox News, all of his surrogates on One American News Network, on Steve Bannon TV, whatever it is, going out there and saying, we are going to steamroll Joe Biden in this election. And now it's about expanding the map. But what will ground them into reality is Election Day 2024, where there's a reality in which Republicans do just as well as they are expecting on the national numbers and win the popular vote for the first time, the second time, honestly, in the 21st century, and lose the Electoral College. Because honestly, you take a look at those 2022 numbers, that's exactly what would have happened if that was the case and this was a presidential election. So Republicans need to be careful. I think for the first time in 8 years, we are seeing an overconfidence more on the Republican side than the Democratic side. Because I think Democrats are terrified. And I think that's the reason they will drive up turnout. That could shock the country in a way they did in Kentucky, in a way that they did in Mississippi, in a way that they did in Ohio, in the way that they did in the 22 midterms, and in special elections far and in between. And so I think that is something that we can look at and say, the numbers back up. That polls aren't always correct in favor of the GOP. In fact, recently speaking, they've underestimated Democrats. And I think Donald Trump is feeding very much into this narrative that he is the shoo-in for the presidential election and letting this slip in his campaign strategy and what he talks about with press that he's comfortable with. And these things are making high-level headlines that I think are serving to the detriment of his campaign. And if this continues, I genuinely think the Trump campaign could be in making their own defeat. Because right now they're doing well. Deviating from where they are now isn't going to help them. But of course, you know that campaigns will run the way they do, and overconfidence is a very tricky thing that did in Democrats in 16 and could do in Republicans in 24. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.